If a person knows the gospel, he immediately remembers that Christ expelled the merchants from the temple. If a person has not read the gospel himself, someone will surely draw his attention with angry indignation to the obvious contradiction between the life of the Orthodox Church and the gospel. But Orthodox priests also read the gospel. Why does money still ring in our temples? Money in the church is a payment for the fact that we live in conditions very different from the cultural environment in which the foundations of Orthodox life were formed. This is our price for the fact that we do not live in a traditional society, not in a peasant community. We are residents of cities, moreover, northern ones, and by no means Palestinian or Greek. Let's imagine the foundations of church political economy at the time when the so-called natural economy prevailed. Well, what was needed for the everyday life of the temple? Bread and wine for communion, wax for candles, olive oil for lamps, frankincense for fragrant incense. All this is completely non-exotic and inexpensive. Greek, Serbian, Bulgarian peasants had it at hand. They grew their own bread, made wine from their own grapes, and an olive tree grew on their own pasture. As incense, resin collected from trees, especially pines and cedars, could be useful. There was almost no money, especially in the village. People brought to the temple a part of what they grew or earned themselves. They did not buy candles in the temple, but brought their own from home. They did not buy a bottle of oil for their home lamps in the temple, but brought oil made by themselves from home. They did not buy prosphora in the temple, but they brought their homemade bread or flour for the temple. They did not buy incense from the church, brought from abroad, but they themselves shared the collected resin with the temple. What we take out of the temple today, people, at least peasants, brought to the temple 100 years ago. Therefore, people brought part of their work to the temple. Today, at memorial services, people bring cookies, apples, and gingerbread from home to remember their loved ones. They put it all on the memorial table, and after the prayer, part of the products is distributed to church officials. A part is offered to all who are in the temple, and a part is distributed to beggars near the temple. The most important church service, the liturgy, used to be the same way in old times. People brought wine and bread from home, handed them to the priest, with a request to pray for those who brought these gifts and for those for whom they were brought. It was what today is called prosphora. In Greek, this word means offering. It is what is brought to the temple, sacrificed, not what is taken from the temple. Nowadays, part of what a person has earned, he brings to the temple in the form of money. He replaces these pieces of paper with something that he did not make himself, but that is needed for the service in the temple. He replaces them with candles, bread, wine, oil, and incense. To an outsider's eye, it seems that a trade transaction is clearly taking place here. Money is exchanged for items. In fact, everything is different. Man made his sacrifice. But you can't light a banknote instead of a candle, and you can't put a coin in a censer instead of incense. The church made sure in advance that the necessary substances were prepared. You don't need to make a candle yourself and carry it to the temple. A Parthian can bring his offering in the form of a coin to the church. And already in the inside of the temple, you walk with a candle in your hand and put it on the candlestick. There is absolutely no act of purchase or sale in this. And even a candle box. Rather, it is the transitional vestibule that helps people from modern civilization to painlessly transition into the world of ancient tradition. Therefore, the presence of a candle box near the church does not violate the gospel commandment at all. Of course, there should be no words in temples, price, cost, fee. It is better to say, a donation for such a candle, a donation for such a prayer. And there are temples in which candles are offered without any talk about money. Candles are just lying open, and next to them there is a box for donations. Someone takes a candle for free, and not infrequently, people drop into this box not the hryvnia that was actually spent on the production of the candle, but 5 or 6 hryvnias, realizing that this is not an exchange of equivalents, but a sacrifice. From the church's point of view, those who buy candles from street vendors or in secular stores, and not in the temple, they sin. If the candle is a symbol of our burning to God and our sacrifice for Him, then what happens if we bought this candle from an ordinary businessman? The candle does not pray for us. The candle only reminds us of the prayer burning that should be in our hearts. A candle today is not a way of lighting a temple or an apartment. It is the embodiment of that small sacrifice that we brought to the temple. This small sacrifice itself is a symbol of the greatest sacrifice that a Christian must make to God. We will give ourselves and each other, and our whole life to Christ God. Is it possible to say this prayer with a saved candle in hand? Such a sacrifice is not brought to the temple, but outside the temple. And such a candle burns not for God, but for our selfishness and penny saving. The candle bought on the street and brought to the temple is not a sacrifice, but something opposite. This is a penny stolen near the temple.